I thank the member and recognize the member Oak Bay Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honourable Speaker. Well, that certainly was half an hour of righteous indignation on display for us today. I had not planned to start my speech with this quote, but I think I will because it's fitting after the member from the Langley area just went on that diatribe. This is a quote from a video named by Justin Greenwood, the interim deputy leader of the BC Conservative Party. This is with reference to Bill 40 that is before us, the Electoral Reform Referendum 2018 Amendment Act, which is in essence adding a new referendum, a second referendum, 2 elections after now, 13 months, within 13 months, to validate if proportional representation passes, that British Columbians want to stay with the system. Now, this is what Justin Greenwood said, and I think it's apt and fitting for me to read this into the record. On a video available on YouTube, he said this on behalf of the BC Conservative Party. As a party, we have chosen not to take a stance on the referendum at this time, other than to ensure our membership and fellow British Columbians have the information needed to make their choice. I felt it necessary to make this video because of the Vote No side, who is mostly supported by, he used the name, it's the leader of the official opposition and the BC Liberals, are using fear-mongering tactics laced with misleading statements in order to tell you how to vote. This is solely because if Prop Rep passes, their party will implode. It's purely for self-preservation purposes only. Those attributes and tactics are not the ones I would support in a party leader, let alone someone who is assuming to be the next Premier of British Columbia. Indeed, the leader of the official opposition should be helping spread the information needed for British Columbians to make an educated vote on an electoral system that suits them best, a choice you can make by using your freedom and agency. The Liberals have stated that the ballot is very confusing and lacks direction. Luckily, he says, luckily I've gathered an elite team of problem solvers, which consists of a crossword puzzle superstar, a word search champion, and a Sudoku master to help crack the code of the confusing ballot. Therein, he went to show quite clearly how easy it is for British Columbians to read the ballot. I, frankly, Honourable Speaker, am shocked at the language I'm hearing from members opposite. I'm shocked that they have so little respect for the intelligence of British Columbians that they feel that they need to try to mislead, they need to try to fearmonger, and they need to try to stand up and ensure that they vote the way the BC Liberals want them to vote, without actually trusting that British Columbians might actually be interested in learning. You know, what's also remarkable about what I'm hearing, Honourable Speaker, is if I take you back to the throne speech of June the 22nd, 2017, this is what the BC Liberal throne speech said. And it said the following: the results that British Columbians delivered in the May election require cooperation. Your government is committed to working with all parties in the legislature. Following referenda in 2005 and 2009, there remains a desire by many members in this place to revisit electoral reform. With the confidence of this House, your government will enable a third referendum on electoral reform. It will require extensive public consultation to develop a clear question and will ensure rural representation in the legislature is protected. It's vital that the referendum reflects the views of British Columbians, not just its political parties. Honourable Speaker, this is precisely the process that government has gone through over the last many months in an unprecedented consultative process leading to, I believe it was 91,000 some odd submissions. I mean, this incredible consultation. And what's remarkable too, Honourable Speaker, is we hear the rhetoric emanating from members opposite. But let me take you back a few months into what these same members, 2 of whom have already spoken, said in response to the throne speech. You know, here, for example, the member for Richmond-Steveston, who hasn't spoken yet, he said in response, our electoral system has been heavily scrutinized in recent years. We held referendums, it's grammatically incorrect, it should be referenda, on electoral reform in 2005 and 2009. both times of particular importance to me because I was either a candidate or seeking re-election as a member of this Assembly. The discussion around electoral system is a key facet of our democracy, and renewing a healthy debate on our system is important. That's why we've committed to a third referendum on electoral reform. That's the member from Richmond-Steveston, arguing passionately for another referendum on electoral reform. Here's what the member from Chilliwack-Kent said. We said that the people of British Columbia will decide that question, and we will provide a path to that decision point. I have no problem with that. The member from Abbotsford Mission said the following. Our electoral system has been heavily scrutinized by our time in government. The discussion about electoral reform will allow us to open up that dialogue, and it's been a source of discussion around the province. Our government is addressing that. It's something we make a top priority. We are also looking, he went on to say, at electoral reform. Electoral reform, I know, is something that is of particular interest to our friends. We're going to develop another referendum and develop a clear question which reflects the needs of British Columbia, but protecting key populations and ensuring that rural areas are treated fairly here in the Assembly. Precisely what government has done. How about the member from Penticton? He says the following. We know that if there is a reform that takes place in the future on how people are able to govern out of this wonderful building, there is a promise that has been put forward for electoral reform no later than November the 13th, 2018. I hope we work together. I love those words. I hope we work together through the extensive consultation that should take place to develop a clear question that British Columbians could understand. Sidebar, do you want and this is part of the parody in the interim BC Conservative leaders, deputy leader's video, he shows the ballot. The question is basically, do you want proportional representation, or do you want to stay with first past the post? Yes or no? Pretty clear if you ask me, Honourable Speaker. And this question in this other referendum, Bill 40, will essentially be, we haven't seen the exact wording, but will essentially be, do you want to stay with the system we just went through, assuming that Prop Rep passes? These are pretty clear questions. Coming back to what the member from Penticton said, he said, and I quote, a clear question that British Columbians could understand and can see that it is 100% in its meaning and depth, and also that not only protects urban areas, but also protects the rural areas of British Columbia. I think that's really important because sometimes rural BC is forgotten. I agree with the member from Penticton. In fact, that has been reflected in the options that have been put forward. The member from Kamloops South Thompson, who was over the top with his enthusiasm, opposite, for this referendum today, rhetoric that's screaming out of the windows and off the Lampert, said the following in the throne speech. We are committed to enabling a third referendum with a clear question and absolute protection for rural representation. Seemed okay at the time. The member, the critic, the member from Vancouver-Langara, who spoke first in this debate, said for many, it's important that we conduct a third referendum on electoral reform to give British Columbians an opportunity to consider once again what is the best electoral system for the province and its people. Again, we listened and we've acted. On and on and on it went in the response to the BC Liberal throne speech. Remarkable, Honourable Speaker. Quite frankly, remarkable. You would never have known it, given the vitriol that was thrown government's way today. Again, coming back to the interim deputy leader of the BC Conservative Party, Justin Greenwood, he says it all. He says here again, he summarizes the reason why he felt he needed to speak. He needed to speak out because he felt, and I quote, that the BC Liberals are using fear-mongering tactics laced with misleading statements in order to tell you how to vote. And this is solely because if Prop Rep passes, their party will implode. It's purely for self-preservation purposes only. Those are not the attributes and tactics that one would want in a leader. Honourable Speaker, I've listened to the arguments. I've attended a debate with the member from Richmond, Queensborough. I believe it's Richmond, Queensborough? Yeah. a debate on proper representation. I've listened to the no side. You know, what saddens me is these debates, not the case of the member from Richmond, Queensbury, did a very fine presentation, but the debates are not constrained by facts. Even today we heard statements of truth that are nothing more than conjecture, fear-mongering about boundaries. I don't know what boundary is going to be for my riding if there's a first-past-the-post election in 2021, because the people, the elections BC periodically review the boundaries. I found out that I had parts of Victoria in this election not too long before this past election. It happens all the time that we look at electoral boundaries. They talk about rural BC and can't draw maps. Well, in fact, if they actually read the document, you would see that it's quite clearly outlined about how ridings would likely double in size. You basically bring two neighboring ridings together in most of the cases, with the exception of the rural-urban one, where you would have slightly different changes. They're very clearly described what would happen there, and it's also very clearly outlined as to how a process would go forward to determine open versus closed lists. My own preference, Honourable Speaker, is open list. Open list is my preference. They, the members opposite, seem to suggest that somehow it's pre-decided that it must be closed list, that somehow there's party elite that are going to be put to become premier without ever being elected. You know, Honourable Speaker, in the world, there are a couple of examples only. I'm not counting Miramar and Venezuela, but only a couple examples of Western democracies that still retain first-past-the-post. The United States and Canada, even Great Britain, Scotland is on a form of proportional representation, whereas England is not. New Zealand, Australia, both in the Senate and has a preferential balloting system in the House. Virtually every single democracy in the world has got a form of proportional representation. Heck, the latest result in Bavaria showed a doubling of support of the Green Party there, a surge of support in the Green Party in Bavaria, a state within Germany that has proportional representation. Prince Edward Island went through the referendum. It passed. They decided not to do it. BC has the potential here of being a leader in Canada if the people of British Columbia want it to change. It's very simple. Do you want to change or not? And if it changes 2 years from now, 2 elections from now, there'll be another referendum to say, do you like what you saw? Shall we keep it? We go back to the New Zealand example. The ballot here in British Columbia is very similar to the ballot that was done in New Zealand when they went for proportional representation. You know, I can tell you from somebody working in the legislature in a minority government, it is hard working with another party. It is not easy at all when you come together with very different backgrounds and ideas. But you get better policy, better public policy when you're forced to collaborate, forced to listen to. Sometimes you have to give more than you want, sometimes you get to take more than you thought you would get. But it's about collaboration and cooperation. It can get testy at times. People can be firm in their positions. But good public policy arises when politicians are forced to work together. And we've been demonstrating that here in this legislature for the last 18 months or so, much to the chagrin of members opposite, who can't fathom the fact that different political parties can actually work together. Instead, they have to create some fear-mongering approach that somehow the world is going to end as we know it, evoking the raiding of Normandy, for heaven's sake. I mean, this is just so offensive, evoking troops on Normandy as somehow being affronted. One member opposite talked about the people who made the greatest sacrifice who wouldn't be able to vote. Of course they can't vote. They're not here today. They made the sacrifice. I mean, it's just the rhetoric that was coming. It was just outrageous. This is really about a referendum, and do we trust the people of British Columbia, as we have twice before, in two votes on single transferable vote. Do we trust them to have enough information? Do we trust them to be able to determine what's in their best interest? The BC Liberals don't. They don't trust British Columbians to actually think for themselves. Because it's not the BC Liberal way. The BC Liberal way is that we'll tell you because we know best. Not only that, it's a small section of us, the elite in the party, I think the backbenchers, will tell you the way it is and it shall be that way. This is what we're seeing modeled here in the objections opposite of the members opposite to this referendum. I'm remarkable, even if they didn't like proportional representation, Honourable Speaker. Why would you not support this? Because this is giving British Columbians a way out if they don't like it. Even if you don't, and again, I understand that there's had 17 years of nefarious kind of activities and backroom deals and conniving, and for them, everything that's done has to have a Machiavellian outcome. I recognize they think that this is some kind of Machiavellian approach to actually influence things. How about it's actually listening to what people have said? People have actually said they wanted a chance to actually have an election. Have they ever thought that maybe government is listening to people? I know that the BC Liberals had a difficult time listening to people, but here we have a government listening to people, bringing in legislation that says, you know what, if you don't like this system and you do vote for it, we will give you a way out in 2 years from now. Honourable Speaker, I've heard so many examples of misinformation being put forward on this referendum. For example, I've heard people say that somehow party elite will choose who's coming in. Well, let me tell you right now, if you are in a number of ridings in British Columbia where you could essentially run anybody from a particular party and you know they will get elected, the person who actually gets appointed is from the party. It is the party right now that already determine which members represent that party in certain ridings. In some ridings, the getting the actual nomination from the party is pretty much a shoe-in to being elected. So right now, frankly, I mean, we just have to go back to the referendum when the Premier at the time lost her seat in Vancouver Point Grey. And so was parachuted into West Kelowna, where she was able to get a seat. You know, this is already happening in terms of the claims that the members opposite are making. The other things that they have said are things like you'll lose local representation. And the irony to hear that coming from members opposite about losing local representation. How do the people in the Okanagan feel right now, knowing that there is not a single MLA sitting in government side? Not very good about that, I can tell you. How do they think the people in the Okanagan felt who didn't agree with government policy, not ever having somebody sitting in government side, in opposition side for the previous 17 years? Not very happy. While some of these Liberal MLAs might think that they represent all people, I can tell you as an MLA serving the riding of Oak Bay Gordon Head that I was inundated from emails from constituents in Liberal ridings because their MLAs would not take on the issues because they contravened the political party of the day's policies. This isn't about access to healthcare systems. You know, maybe you have a person who needs help accessing. All constituency officers work in that regard. This is about perhaps there's an overpass in a region where there's a concern for a natural ecosystem, and the MLA for the area is not willing to actually entertain meetings with concerned citizens. They come to us. If in these regions you had representation from both opposition and government, you'd actually get better local representation. The Okanagan, pick 9 MLAs who are serving in the Okanagan right now, you probably would have had, of those 9, 5 of them would have been BC Liberal. 3 of them would have been BC NDP, and 1 of them would have been BC Green. The Okanagan would be served by members in opposition, members in the Green, and also members in the government. Healthy for democracy. Vancouver Island, right now, Honourable Speaker, Vancouver Island has but 1 representative in Parksville-Qualicum. There is nobody in opposition from the Victoria region. And prior to that, there was nobody in government in the Capital Regional District. That's wrong. Liberals in the Capital Regional District need representation. They need representation in this legislature, but they don't have it. Again, it comes back to what was so succinctly pointed out by Mr. Greenwood, the BC Conservative Party interim deputy leader, who essentially says the fear is really an internal fear that the BC Liberals know that their loosey-goosey coalition of Conservatives and Liberals is going to fall apart. And to be honest, there's hardly any Liberals left actually over on that side, but that's okay because they've been I know there's one over there. I know there's one, but but I do have a lot of time for that one federal liberal over there. But there's not many left in that party. This would actually be healthy for democracy. It would be healthy for there to be a party that actually represented the views, the prevailing views of people in the Fraser Valley, front and center, when issues come up that they feel are not being dealt with. It would be healthy for people to feel like their views in Caribou, Chilcotin, and elsewhere were actually represented in a manner that's actually not having to be diffused by competing interests, by certain ridings here and certain ridings there, but are actually able to speak out passionately for these issues in both opposition and in government. If you're an opposition MLA, you can speak out directly. If you're in government, you can't speak out directly. It's much more difficult. So, I like the chippery over there. I understand that the Liberals, it's 8:30. True. Whose idea was this to go till 9 o'clock? But no, coming back to the point, much of the information that has been put forward, I fear is actually doing the no side an actual great disservice, because I have talked to many people, and people feel very suspicious as to information that they can quickly check today and themselves on the internet as to be factually incorrect. And when factually incorrect information is put forward, it actually does a disservice. Talks about these splinter parties somehow rising out of nowhere when you need to have 5% of the vote in order to actually get representation. Again, a misrepresentation that has been put there. People have talked about the fact that there be party lists, that all these people will just be appointed from backroom deals. Misrepresentation there. People talk about People talk about loss of local representation. Again, misrepresentation there, because you have the constituents. People somehow think that this is unique in the world, when again, it's actually what's different is actually the fact that in British Columbia, we are very much unlike the rest of the world, where forms of proportional representation exist. And with that, Honourable Speaker, I really, truly cannot understand why members opposite, I feel that they've lost their moral compass, Honourable Speaker, why they would not vote in support of a bill that actually gives British Columbians a choice to go back to the system if they don't like a proportional representation and it pass. It really is mind-boggling to me. I wish I could understand it, and I look forward to some more of the commentary coming our way in the debates of this bill. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.